today we're going to explore some best practices for enhancing your referral management workflow. So I want you to think, so personally, I think that it's important to know who you all are because we're all going to differ a little bit in our referral management processes, right? You're the person either sending the data or receiving the data, but all are very important. And so I wanted to make sure that we all knew who each other was. So what challenges have you faced in managing your referrals in your practice? There's probably a lot of common ones, but I'd love to hear from you specifically. So yeah, what are those challenges that you faced with managing your referrals? Can anyone share? Rosa, do you find, you can answer in the chat if you're not able to unmute, do you find that internal medicine, you have any challenge with maybe the time frame of specialists? I think that's an often challenge experience. You know, it's an overwhelming system, as we all know. The IE is short-staffed on physicians and clinicians, so that's an area of challenge when you're walking through this process. So the importance, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and go to the importance of having a go-to person. So are you responsible for coordinating referrals in your office? We know some of the team today is on that do. So the referral coordinator is the single point of contact. They're going to serve as your liaison among the medical staff, among the specialists, the patients. They're in charge of managing those referrals, making sure all of the information's accurate before transferring. You don't have any problems. Good. I love that, Rosa. That's great. That means that you have probably some pretty good workflows in place. But, you know, having that coordinator is going to help with communication, having someone accountable. That's really important. Someone that's going to be identifying obstacles that are within your practice, and then being able to support the patients effectively. So just kind of take a moment now to reflect on your current referral processes. What steps are standardized in your practice? So for example, do you have a checklist for initiating referrals? This is where you're going to tee up the specialist to make sure they have every single thing that they need. And this is going to reduce a lot of administrative burden of back and forth communication. So do you have a system in place for this?
Yes, we have a checklist for depending on what type of referral, because we do different ones. We refer to dialysis, we refer to imaging. So yes, we have a checklist. There's a checklist in place that they follow so they can make sure that they gather all information that before to submit, and make sure that we send everything that's needed to the receiver so that we
That's
can get the
great.
patient scheduled with them.
Do you find that anything is missing in that process? Do you have a good double verification system to make sure that nothing gets missed?
So that is what I recently initiated, was to make sure that, okay, once you submit it over, you need to make sure that you follow up with a follow-up call to make sure that they received it. Once they receive, also place a call to the patient to let them know that now we have sent everything over, to the imaging center or to the dialysis or to the lab, wherever it is that we're sending anything to. And then if patient needs to follow up, now they can follow up with them, because they will be the ones now scheduling that type of procedure or that with them. So I make sure, because what was happening is, yes, the referrals are just being sent, and then that's it. Then it was like, okay, what's happening? And we don't hear back. We didn't, patients calling us, so then it turned into like, a spaghetti bowl. So I said, okay, no, we really have to make sure, just because you're sending it over, you can't count on that. You have to do your due diligence afterwards and still work that chart and make sure that it got to point B, and then make sure it gets to point C as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. Yeah. I mean, and you're seeing that you're kind of identifying little issues and you're gathering this feedback from either your patients, the coordinator themselves, maybe the specialist. And so these are all very important. So teeing that doctor up is going to be extremely important. So your checklist, you want to make sure that it includes the comprehensive patient assessment, right? Making sure you have your medical history, all their current medications, any specific symptoms, and then all relevant tests that are necessary or relevant to that appointment. And, just because this is going to eliminate so much back and forth, you need to check within that documentation. Sometimes sending the document or the chart note isn't necessarily enough because it may not include everything necessary for that appointment. So the reason for the referral is very important. The goals that the referring provider has, is this just for a consult? We just want to get your opinion, or do we want some testing done? Do we want them to follow through with the entire treatment plan? I think being very specific on that, either within the documentation or on the referral form, is going to be extremely important. Insurance verification. This one's really good. And I put kind of the doctor and the referral coordinator working together on this because it's a very important piece. You want to make sure that you are communicating with your physician when specific language needs to be added to the document. So I'll share a story. I worked in primary care. We would send patients over for sleep studies, but their insurances were denying these sleep studies, even though it's a standard test. It's very informative. It was the way that we were documenting that was causing the problem. And so if I didn't tell the doctor that, we would have gotten continuous denials for this patient. And so I was able to share that with him. He ended up putting it in a template and it worked really, really well. So this is important in the coordinating process. So the next step is for that coordinator, now that they've, gotten everything, they've teed up the note, it's all right. Now you want to just make sure that you have, that you complete that referral request. As Carissa mentioned, having a standardized form that includes the demographics, and this is up-to-date demographics. You don't want your specialist to also have a bad address or a bad phone number. So making sure that that information is correct is very important. Medical history, everything's documented, the reason for the referral, just reiterating these things to you. Again, we're having this coordinator double check these things to eliminate any burdens on your practice as well as the specialist. Including all those relevant tests, of course, and then finally submission. So let's go ahead and then move on a little bit to post-submission tracking and follow-up. As Carissa mentioned, a very important piece to referring. You can't just send off the referral and hope that someone caught it. And so you want to make sure that you're tracking these things, you're following up with the patient as well as a key contact in the practice that you're referring to. And so, tracking these referrals are very important. Following up with your patient, extremely, this following up with your patient is going to also allow to get me feedback. I called this doctor's office 10 times before I finally got a call back. That's information that the coordinator needs to know so that she has hopefully some sort of a spreadsheet or referral tracking system where she can make these little notes to say, Dr. So-and-so's practice has a 6-month wait. Okay, well, my patient can't wait 6 months, so I'm going to have to go down the line and call someone else. And so having that is going to be very important. And you can gather that feedback from your patients too. Receiving the specialist feedback, making sure that you get those things, the follow-up reports, consult notes, testing, et cetera, of course. And then back to reviewing and implementing feedback. I think it's extremely important, whether you're working with the referral coordinator and maybe the physician's medical assistant for these things, you want to have that closed loop. As Carissa mentioned, it's extremely important. You see that it causes a lot of friction. It causes patients to be calling. Those things, with high call volume practices everyone's talking about, standardizing a lot of these processes are going to help with those, as you know. So this is kind of the gold standard of the referral management process. The referring physician sends to their internal referral coordinator. You review all the data, double check it, make sure everything's there. Hopefully you can send to an intake coordinator. I highly recommend, if you don't already, making relationships or forming relationships with the people that are taking in those referrals, because they can be your point of contact as well. If it's an office manager, if it's a Ramona, whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that you have that point of contact. So then the intake coordinator assures that the appointment occurs and then gets back to the referring physician. So this is, again, just kind of a standard flow, essentially, of each moving part within that referral management process. Now, let's talk a little bit about how can we automate, or how do you automate any of the processes to make for a less administrative burden. So for example, I was a solo practice manager, just myself and the physician for a while there. And so I needed to make sure that I had a system in place where I could track these things through our EHR. I mean, I had to, it was imperative, or I would lose, things would fall through the cracks. So I developed a system for that. Are there some things that you automate in your referral tracking management system? Curious. Anyone?
Ours are all on the EHR, and um the girls put on there whether they sent it or whatever, updates to that, and it still
Mhm.
goes into another line where they could check everything.
Okay, and then do they get that? Does it stay in an inbox, or how does that work
I
until
think
it's
it stays in
closed?
an inbox, right, girls? I think until they close the loop when they get the final
Okay.
um notes from the specialist.
That's great. What about who you choose? Can you, is that not necessarily automated, but how is that important in this gold standard? Who you choose, especially for, practices like Rosa, practices like Wendy's, who are more in the primary care space. How do you choose what referral or who to refer to?
I think that goes off of base their insurance and who they're contracted with.
Mhm.
And I think they'll have one that they use more than the others. But I think with these girls with us, they get a lot of well, they can't see us for this time, redirect me. And then they'll go, okay, we'll go ahead, and they submit another one to redirect, and then they'll call them back and tell them, and they're, oh, I already got an appointment with the other one. Never mind.
Oh,
Yes,
that
this
that's
happens to my girls a lot.
that's really tough. So it's the patient kind of changing their mind. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm curious, are you giving the patient those options, or are they finding them on their own?
What do you, Ramona or Amparo, do you guys give them options, or you just redirect to the insurance and then the insurance gives them a new one?
I just redirect them to another person. And basically, they just keep calling to redirect until they're happy with who they're seeing.
Okay. So then this is the insurance automatically giving a new, like, for example, IHP, they're giving a new referral.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I'm curious, since I have you both have your attention, do you have someone at that referral, those common referral locations that you can work with? Right, call directly.
I do have
That's
some
good. Yeah.
specialists that I do. I call myself and try scheduling the appointments myself.
Okay, that's great. I think that that's a good service to provide your patient. Is just knowing that someone's kind of helping them along the way, as long as it doesn't become too burdensome on your practice. But I think that that's a good way to approach things. Um, does the coordinator, or do you as coordinators report back to the clinical team to let them know, hey, we are not getting this patient seen, like it's just taking too long?
The urgent ones, certain referrals, urgents or stats, if we can't get them in, yes. But
Okay,
the
that's great.
routine, no.
That's fine. Yeah, because you probably have a system in place where what your protocols are. I think most practices do have a protocol, or hopefully their providers letting them know like it's not urgent. So that gives the referral coordinators a little bit of leeway to scheduling, or making sure that your clinical team is saying this person needs to be seen this week, and then communicating that. I know that the referral coordinators are probably going to be like, oh, this week, how? But that's why referral list is so important that you can just go down the list and say, this person's never going to get seen within a week at this practice. But maybe a newer practice that's in the area, you can form a relationship that's trying to grow their practice, and then they can get people in right away. So there's a lot of ways that you can enhance that aspect of your practice. One thing that I really loved, again, to try to help streamline some of these things was if it was a specific appointment. So we worked internal medicine as well, Rosa, and if it was to a cardiologist, we would have a standard template of explanation, making sure the patient asks specific questions, and then it would just get pushed right to the patient with their appointment information. So whatever you have in place, if you're able to automate that, that's great. I always love having a dedicated hotline for patients to call, just a phone number in case they have questions for referrals, to reduce the call volume for that particular. Maybe your phone tree can point to one of those. So what about following up? So first, does anyone have any questions about this, or does anyone have any comments about how this isn't working again in your practice? We're talking about challenges too. And we've got so many different specialists on the line. So for your primary referral sources, feel free to ask questions about what works better. So let's move on to follow-up. So do you have follow-up protocols? Carissa mentioned they do. They make sure, even Wendy mentioned that they do not end that process until they know that the patient's been seen. I think that that's very important to make sure that your patients are being properly cared for, is to ensuring that that visit gets documented and tracked. What about, is the physician communicating with specialists? Do any of you, not just the primary care practices here, but the specialists, are you communicating with your referral sources? I think having even regular meetings where they're communicating with each other could be really key in building a relationship and streamlining those referrals. You know, if Dr. Tweed gets on the phone and says, hey, you know, I really need my patients to be seen sooner than this. Is there a better protocol for this? Maybe the physician who you're referring to isn't even aware of these challenges within his practice. So I think that these clinicians should be communicating with each other. I'm curious, are your physicians having any regular meetings with their referral sources? You know, you want to be able to build these relationships. And I can say one way that I've seen other members do this is through our socials. So for example, I'll share a little bit later, but we're having a social here in Riverside in May. And so that's typically all the physicians that are in that area. And so when they're networking with each other, they can talk about these things. And so taking advantage of those types of situations are going to be important in building those relationships. Does your coordinator have a relationship with the intake staff? We talked about that, you know, having a go-to person that you can call upon is going to be extremely helpful in managing your referral protocols. And, you know, making this a priority at all is not very common in medical practices. But I think you truly, in order to build those relationships for streamlining, you want to know all the moving parts within the referral system. And then you track your referral management processes. Obviously, many of you do. It's very important to caring for your patients, because simply, if you don't, you know that you're going to get high call volumes. You're going to get patients that are angry. So I'm pretty sure you all have a referral tracking system, but ensuring that that system is handled in a timely manner, looking at what is working within that system, what's not, is going to be very important for follow-up and continuous improvement. And then what insights you gain from your patients. You know they're going to tell you, they always do. You know, you referred me to this doctor, it took me X amount of times, they canceled my appointment. Whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that you're giving that feedback back to both the clinical team that's referring as well as the person that's handling your referrals.